It was supposed to be a quiet life. After years of working corporate jobs in the city, I finally left everything behind and bought a modest ranch, just outside a small town in Texas, the kind of place where the horizon stretches wide and golden, where the mornings smell like dewy grass and cows graze peacefully under the open sky. That land was my peace, my second chance. I had 20 head of cattle, nothing fancy, mostly mixed breeds, but to me, they weren't just livestock. They were a new beginning. Each one had a name. I knew their habits, their quirks. I watched over them like a parent. The trouble started about 6 months after I moved in. At first, it was small things. A broken fence, a warning letter from the HOA saying my barn paint wasn't community compliant. I didn't think much of it. Just overzealous neighbors, maybe. I even laughed about it with my brother, David. He's a judge sharp as a tack, cool under pressure. He always said, stay calm. Paper trails beat punches. But then things escalated. One morning, I came outside to find my front gate chained shut. No warning, no note, just a heavy padlock welded on. I had to call a welder to get it off. When I contacted the HOA president, a woman named Karen Whitaker, yeah, the Karen she said, it was a safety measure because my cows were creating odor complaints. Let me be clear, my property was fenced, regulated, and well managed. There were no smells, no leaks, no issues. But she hated it, hated me, hated the idea that some outsider had brought livestock into her perfect neighborhood. It only got worse. She started patrolling with her little golf cart, taking photos over my fence, even once coming onto my property yelling at me while recording with her phone. I warned her that trespassing on farm property wasn't a joke. She smirked and said, "This isn't a farm, this is a neighborhood. You don't belong here." I tried to be civil. Then one morning, I found Daisy, my oldest cow. She was lying by the fence, foam at the mouth, barely breathing. I ran to her, heart pounding. I called the vet, and he rushed over. But before he even pulled his gloves on, he looked up at me and said, "You need to check your water fast." I sprinted to the trough. The water had a blue-green sheen, chemical smell, sharp, wrong. My knees buckled. 3 more cows were showing signs. Within hours, they were gone. The vet tested the water. His face said it all before the words even came out. Rat poison. Somebody had dumped poison into my cattle's water supply. I stood over Daisy's lifeless body that night, staring into the stars like they owed me an answer. My fists clenched, my stomach hollow. Something inside me cracked. This wasn't just harassment. This was war. I went inside, called David. He listened quietly, then said 3 words, "Time to fight." I didn't know how bad things were going to get, but I knew this: Karen had crossed the line, and she had no idea who she was messing with. The sheriff came the next morning. He was polite, but tired, like a man who'd been called out to deal with petty disputes, one too many times. I showed him the poisoned water, the dead cows, and the security footage grainy, but clear enough to show a shadowy figure climbing over my side fence late at night. He took notes. Nodded a lot, but I could tell. He wasn't going to push it. "You don't have proof who did it," he said. "Could be kids. Could be random vandalism. I'll file a report, but unless we get a confession or a better ID." His voice trailed off like he didn't want to. Finish the sentence. I looked him in the eye. "I know who did it," he sighed. "I know who you think did it. Karen, of course. It was Karen. She'd been escalating ever since I moved in spreading lies, filing HOA complaints, even trying to fine me for unauthorized livestock presence, even though my land was zoned agricultural before the HOA even existed. She hated that I didn't kneel to her fake rules. She hated that my cows were happy and free on land she thought belonged in a brochure. But this was criminal, and I wasn't going to let it slide. David arrived that evening, when he stepped out of his black SUV in his tailored blazer and calm, commanding tone. Even the birds quieted down. My big brother wasn't just a judge. He was the judge. No nonsense. Brilliant and pissed off. He walked the property with me, examined everything. The dead cattle, the trough, the tire tracks in the dirt. Then he pulled out his phone and started taking photos. "I'll have a private investigator here by morning," he said, "and we're filing for a temporary restraining order immediately against Karen and the HOA board." "But will it even matter?" I asked. She owns half the board. The sheriff won't act. Nobody around here's willing to touch her. David looked at me, eyes hard. That's why you've got me. She messed with the wrong man, and I don't need permission to expose what's coming. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat by the barn with a flashlight in one hand and a shotgun across my knees. Not to hurt anyone, but to send a message. I was done being polite. And just before sunrise, someone came back, a figure, hooded, trying to sneak along the outer fence line. I stood up slowly, clicked the flashlight on, and aimed it right at them. They froze. It wasn't Karen. It was her son Tyler, pale, twitchy, drunk from the looks of it. He stumbled back when he saw me. I said nothing, just let him run. He tripped twice before he made it to the road. But I got it all on video. The next day, the pie arrived. He was quiet, ex-military type, and within hours he had trail cam footage, tire casts, and security logs from neighbors who had seen Karen and Tyler near my fence the night the poisoning happened. One neighbor even overheard Karen bragging at a wine night. Those cows won't be a problem much longer. We had enough. David filed the first motion by noon the next day, but Karen wasn't done yet. That same afternoon, I came home from town to find a notice stapled to my barn door: emergency. HOA board meeting, motion to remove unauthorized farm animals, and below it, a fine, $87,000. $87,000 for environmental cleanup, property damage, and stress caused to board members. I stood there, staring at the paper, hands shaking. They were trying to bankrupt me. That land, but they made one fatal mistake. They did it while David was still in town. David doesn't believe in backing down. He believes in justice, and justice was coming. David stared at the $87,000 fine notice like it was a joke that forgot to be funny. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cuss or tear the paper in half. He just looked at it, eyes cold, and said, "They're going to regret putting this in writing." Within the hour, we were in his rented black SUV, driving to the county courthouse. On the way, he made 2 phone calls. One to a federal environmental lawyer he knew from back in D.C., the other to a state attorney general's office. Contact, they want to play with fire, David said, voice calm. Let's introduce them to a wildfire. We filed an emergency injunction against the HOA and Karen specifically, with the trail cam footage, the vet's toxicology report, and sworn neighbor statements. It wasn't hard to get the judge to freeze all HOA actions against my property, including the fine. But even that wasn't the bomb. The real hit came from David's legal team digging into HOA records. Turns out Karen had been laundering money through HOA beautification projects. She'd created fake maintenance companies, signed off on checks, and funneled thousands into a shell company tied to her son Tyler. David smirked as he showed me the documents. "She's not just a bully," he said. "She's a felon." The next day, we served Karen with 2 lawsuits, one civil, one criminal. She lost it, stormed onto my property in broad daylight, shouting, shaking the papers in her hand like they were lies made of ink. I recorded every second. "You think you can come into my neighborhood and ruin my life?" she screamed. I kept my voice level. "You poisoned my cows." She scoffed, but her eyes gave it away. For a flash, a split second, she looked guilty. "Get off my land," I said. She didn't move until a black, unmarked SUV pulled up behind her. David stepped out, calm and composed, holding another envelope. "This is a court summons," he said, handing it over. "You're being sued for animal cruelty, trespassing, and attempted destruction of private property. Oh, and by the way, the board you run, they've been subpoenaed to. IRS is now involved." She went pale. But she wasn't the only one cracking. Tyler, her son, was arrested 2 days later for breaking into a farm supply store, caught on security cam stealing what looked like rat poison, the same brand found in my cow's water. He didn't talk at first, but when he realized his mom wasn't going to bail him out, he flipped, told everything. Karen, the plan. The HOA meeting where they agreed to get rid of the livestock before the board election. He even admitted to pouring the poison himself, while Karen stood watch. With his signed confession, the case shifted fast. Now, it wasn't just civil court, it was criminal. Karen was charged with conspiracy to commit felony animal cruelty, environmental contamination, and HOA fraud. I'll never forget the moment she was arrested. It was during the HOA's monthly meeting. Everyone was there, wine glasses in hand, folded arms, smug smiles, until 2 sheriff's deputies walked in and handcuffed her in front of everyone. She screamed, threatened to sue, said we were all liars, but the room was silent. No one stood up for her. No one even looked her in the eye, because the truth had finally caught up. And justice, it had only just begun. Ask ChatGPT. Word spread fast. By the next morning, the local paper had a front-page headline: HOA president arrested in poisoning plot judges, brother targeted. That's when the TV crews showed up. News vans lined the cul-de-sac, their antennas, reaching toward the sky like vultures sniffing blood. I stayed quiet, refused every interview. David told me, let the court speak first, let them squirm. And they did. One by one, HOA board members started resigning. The treasurer, the secretary, even Karen's closest friend. Susan, who had once stood on my porch, screaming about the smell of manure ruining her wine nights, now quietly emailed her resignation and lawyered up. And the most ironic part, the HOA's bylaws that Karen weaponized against me. David used those same bylaws to call for a mandatory emergency re-election. You know who got voted HOA president? Me. I didn't even want the title, but the neighborhood was furious. People started coming up to me, apologizing, saying they never knew how far Karen had gone, that they thought it was just drama until the arrests happened. Some cried. One man, a veteran with a prosthetic leg, told me she tried to fine me for flying my American flag. You stood up to her when we didn't. Thank you. But behind all the celebration, I couldn't forget Daisy or the other cows. I stood out in the pasture that night with the stars wide above me, just remembering. The sound of their hooves in the morning, the way they'd nuzzle my pockets for snacks, the trust they had in me, and how I couldn't protect them. Wasn't just about winning a lawsuit, it was about restoring what they tried to kill. David came out with 2 cups of coffee and handed me one. They didn't die for nothing, he said. You turned their story into justice. Now finish it. So we did. Karen's trial began 2 weeks later. The prosecution was airtight. Tyler's confession, the vet's toxicology report, the trail cam footage, Karen's own text messages recovered from her phone, one of which read, "If he wants a farm, let him deal with dead animals." The courtroom was silent when that was read. Karen sat in a gray pantsuit, pale and furious, her eyes darting, her hands trembling. Her lawyer tried to argue that Tyler acted alone, that Karen didn't know what he was doing, but it didn't hold. Not when the jury saw the HOA meeting notes, the fake invoices, the shell companies, the property access logs, not when a retired HOA board member took the stand and said, "She told us she wanted the cows gone, that it was her neighborhood, her rules. We were scared to say no." When the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, I didn't cheer, didn't cry, I just exhaled. Karen was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Tyler got 2 with parole. The judge even mandated restitution payments, a 6-figure sum, most of which would go toward rebuilding what she destroyed, and the HOA disbanded. My land protected under new zoning, no one could ever challenge it again. But more than that, people finally saw me as more than that guy with the cows. I was part of the community now, respected, known, and the pastures. They didn't stay empty for long, because a week after the trial, I bought 5 new calves, and I named one of them Daisy. She looked just like the old girl brown spots. Calm eyes, always walking ahead of the others like she owned the land. And maybe she did. In a way, they all did. But just when I thought it was over just, when peace had settled in like dust after a storm, I got a call, blocked. Number I answered, a familiar voice, cold, quiet, full of poison. "You think this is done?" she said. "You don't know who I know." Then the line went dead. Karen might be behind bars, but her reach, that might be just getting started. That call haunted me. For days, I kept it to myself. I didn't tell David. I didn't tell anyone. Maybe it was a bluff. Maybe she was just lashing out from behind bars. But deep down, I knew. Karen wasn't built to lose. She wasn't just angry, she was dangerous. 2 weeks later, strange things started happening again. First, the gate camera went dark. No windstorm, no power outage, just dead, fried. From the inside, I replaced it. 2 days later, it happened again. Then came the letters, "No return address." No fingerprints, just cheap paper and threats. Drop the charges or you'll lose more than cows. David immediately ordered full surveillance, hired a private security firm to watch the perimeter, even installed motion sensors and floodlights across the ranch. But one night, just before midnight, I heard barking, loud, sharp. My 2 shepherds going wild near the west fence. I grabbed the rifle and ran outside barefoot, heart pounding. The floodlights snapped on as I reached the fence end. There they were, 2 men, hooded, one already halfway over, the other holding a gas can. They didn't expect resistance. I fired a warning shot into the errand. They bolted like shadows. Into the brush, I chased, but they were fast and knew the terrain. By the time the deputies arrived, they were long gone, accelerant, likely meant for my barn. My new calves had been locked inside. If I hadn't heard the dogs, the deputies took it seriously this time. Between the ongoing federal case and attempted arson, they opened a broader investigation. What they uncovered blew everything wide. Karen had been talking to people from jail, using coded language through other inmates and even paid visitors. She had contacts old real estate partners, disgruntled HOA loyalists, people with grudges, debts, or just a price tag big enough to buy their silence. But here's the twist. It wasn't just about revenge. She was trying to take the land. Out, the area surrounding my ranchworth, little before, was now being eyed by developers for a massive suburban expansion. And Karen had invested in one of the early contracts before she ever met me. If I sold, if I left, her cut would multiply. My cows weren't just a nuisance to her, they were in the way. David leaned back in his chair, looking over the case files. "This was never personal," he said. "This was about greed dressed up as control. She saw you as a roadblock, but she underestimated one thing. Me, I wasn't leaving. I wasn't selling. And I wasn't scared. Not anymore. We worked with federal agents. Tied the threats, the fire attempt, the vandalism, all of it back to her network. More arrests followed. Every loose end, every shady deal, brought down like a house of cards. And, finally, the last nail. Her early investment contracts were seized under RICO statutes. She lost her shares, her money, her influence. Karen Whitaker's empire ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. And in the silence that followed, something grew. Peace. Real peace. Months passed, the grass returned thicker, the pasture fuller. I rebuilt the barn stronger than before. My herd grew, new life replacing what had been taken, and the community. They showed up every branding day, every fencing weekend. Neighbors once, strangers, now friends. At the next county fair, I entered. Daisy, the Nuani, the youth showcase, she didn't win. She came in second. But when they handed that ribbon to the little girl who led her around the pen, I cried quietly because I realized this wasn't a story about cows or courtrooms or HOA tyranny. It was a story about standing your ground and knowing that no matter how dark the night gets, no matter how strong the storm, the land remembers who fought for it, and it never forgets who tried to poison it.